To those of you who were watching our live performance, we had technical difficulties due to House members messing up our meeting. And now we're back on a Senate meeting, and we will continue with testimony from Judge Treadwell, but I assure you, it is the House's fault that we were cut off. Judge?
Thank you very much. When we broke, I was about to talk about the transitional provision, which is section 54, section 1 of the bill. It will be new section 13 BSA, section 54. It's on pages 3 and 4, which is a transitional provision which basically describes how you would take all existing crimes and, based upon the existing statutory maximum, fit them into the proposed sentencing structure here. And what it could do is say that all felonies punishable by a maximum term of life imprisonment automatically become Class A felony. Everything with a maximum term of 20 years or more, but less than life, would automatically become a Class B felony, punishable by a maximum of 20 years. The language could effectively be used to classify all existing offenses without any further work from the legislature. What the remaining provisions of the bill do, and what the continuing work that the Sentencing Commission and committees of the Sentencing Commission are doing, are taking that effectively automatic classification and then considering whether that results in a crime being classified in a way that probably makes less sense, and whether it should be moved around. There are, what I would suggest are some anomalies in Vermont's existing statutory maximum penalties. A good example would be DUI 1 is punishable with a maximum of, I think it's 2 years and a $750 fine. But DLS, which would, I think by any stretch be regarded as a less serious offense, it's also 2 years, but a $5,000 fine. And it does not make sense, or the committee's conclusion was that it did not make sense for those inconsistencies to exist. So that is why the committee is continuing to do work, looking at what automatic classification would result in, and then considering whether offenses should be moved around. As Representative Lalonde mentioned, work has been done with respect to sex offenses. We've looked at property crimes clearly. We have also looked at motor vehicle offenses. There's a proposal related to that. Offenses against persons, basically assaultive crimes, are being reviewed, and Title 18 drug offenses are also being considered. So that is the ongoing work that the committee has been doing. We are also reviewing all existing fine-only misdemeanors to make a recommendation as to whether those should remain criminal offenses, and looking at what could be described as archaic or rarely charged offenses to decide whether those should remain criminal offenses. Those are actually both recommendations that come out of the Act 61 Criminal Code Reclassification Report back from 2015. I think what probably makes sense is for me to answer questions if anyone has any, or if there are other areas that any senators, any of you might like me to address, I'm happy to do so.
Are there questions from the committee for Judge Treadwell? Senator Baruth.
Thank you, Judge Treadwell. I'm just wondering if you can respond to that basic opening frame question about whether we need to do something this year, or whether we could conceivably wait until further work is done on the classificatory scheme and how the offenses would fit into it. Would there be harm done if we were to wait until more of the work had been complete?
I don't know that there would be harm done. I think Representative Lalonde's point about placing a stake in the ground and setting a deadline for work to be done is a valid point. I mean, if the if the language can be tweaked to make classification automatic, this could result, the bill could result in all crimes being subject to placement in a classification effective July 1, 2022. Obviously, to the extent that the legislature wishes to consider the recommendations of the Sentencing Commission as to moving offenses around within the classification scheme, that's something that's not going to happen till the next legislative session. But you don't need to wait for that in order for classification to occur.
Well,
Thank you very much.
Okay. Judge, looking at, and again, I haven't read the whole bill, and I'm hoping to have the opportunity to do that when I get a hard copy, but looking at the transitional positions and knowing that the bill's not effective until 2022, and some of your issues, the major issues, I think, are due with the misdemeanors. And I'm wondering if we just did misdemeanors and let the felonies go for a while, and because that's where a lot of the discretion is used county to county, I think. If we focus just on the misdemeanors at this point.
The only a concern with that would be that, given particularly in the property crime area where there are so many overlapping offenses, if you just deal with misdemeanors, that would leave the opportunity to charge felony offenses without being subject to sort of the classification structure that would apply to misdemeanors generally. If the idea was to just do automatic classification, just to take all existing misdemeanors and classify them without considering moving them around relative to each other, that could, I think, I don't see any reason why that couldn't be done. But if you were going to do the automatic classification, it seems to me that it might as well be done across the full range of offenses.
I understand that, but as we just experienced with a Zoom meeting getting shut off in the middle, it's hard to legislate thoughtfully in this environment when there's, I mean, this is a very complex bill. I'm sure that there are reasons why, and it probably had to do with who's the better lobbyist. The credit card industry, for example, on the false token, the bankers are, but maybe nobody cared if I cash a $20 bad check at the local grocery store. They didn't have as good a lobbyist as the bankers and the credit card industry. So maybe that's why the penalties are different.
Well, Senator, I'm sure you remember the discussions we had many years ago when we were moving the petty larceny, grand larceny, retail theft misdemeanor, retail theft felony, and how it took, I think, the entire 2 years of the biennium to settle on $900 as the decision.
Right. Senator Baruth.
Yeah, I guess I would just want to amplify the chair's point in terms of complexity and timing. So this does commit us in a very serious way to a certain classificatory system going forward, with the idea that we'll work out outliers, as the testimony had it, at a later point. And we're well through the first week of June. We would normally be adjourned by now. So to consider that sort of thing on the fly in a remote fashion strikes me as the best way to produce unintended consequences that we would in 1 or 2 years need to fix. And since there's no pressing need for this and no harm to be done if we wait a year, it seems like picking this same language up in January doesn't, January is not very far away now. We're 6 months from there. So I just find myself reluctant to rush forward with this as a way to make sure that we do work that is yet to be done.
Senator Benning.
Judge, in that regard, can you tell me when the commission expects to finish its work?
There are proposals with respect to every sort of broad group that I had identified, except for the Title 18 offenses that are, I think, before the full commission currently. The only group, the only category that might not be true with respect to crimes against persons, but there are at least a couple of proposals out there that I think are about to go to the commission. And then, so the only category where there hasn't been a formal structure identified yet is Title 18 offenses. There's a complication there because we could assign penalties to the existing offense structure, or more broadly look at drug crimes generally. And I think both of those issues are before the commission as a whole. It's a very long answer to say we have a meeting in July. I expect that there will be more coming out of the commission at that time.
Let me ask it a different way. Do you anticipate that you will be done by January of 2021?
There could at least be proposals available by January 2021. Whether the committee and the commission can reach a consensus as to a particular proposal with respect to each categories, I can't tell you that.
Okay.
Senator Sears?
Yes, sir. Yes, Senator Nitka, I'm sorry.
White.
Then Senator White.
Oh, okay. I'm just wondering if this were to go forward as it is now, Judge Treadwell, did I understand this right? The penalty during the transition period would drop down to the lesser number of those proposals?
No, it's the transitional provision can be used to take the penalty of the offenses that currently exist and place it into the structure. All penalties will. Yeah. So maybe I could give an example. Would that be an effective way of doing that?
Yes, because we couldn't hear what you said the last time.
Oh, I'm sorry. I am plugged into the state's internet system here in Brattleboro, but I make no comments about that.
You sound a little bit like somebody from Star Wars.
Oh, well, I'm very sorry about that.
That's better.
The aggravated assault is currently punishable, most of the varieties, by a maximum term of 15 years. There is no classification which has a 15-year maximum. But what that would do is it would make it a Class C felony. So going forward, the maximum penalty for aggravated assault, previously a 15-year felony, would be 10 years. Okay. Burglary, there are, as Representative Lalonde mentions, there are varieties of burglary. The 25-year variety of burglary of an occupied dwelling, would become a Class B felony, punishable by a maximum of 20 years. The 15-year category of burglary will become a Class C felony, punishable by 10 years. So the structure can take all existing sentences and fit them in and move all of them down. Almost all of them down.
Senator White.
I have to say, I agree with Philip. We can have relatively complex or philosophical discussions in this manner and come to some decisions, but this is such a complex bill. And I mean, just the fact that we got zoomed out or whatever we did. And then most of what you just said, Judge Treadwell, I couldn't understand since we got back into the meeting because it kept going in and out and in and out. I think I do not want to act on this bill now at all because I think there's so many complexities, and just what you were saying, Judge Treadwell, about it could be this, and if we did 25 years, it could be that. This is very complicated, and I think Philip is right. We need to be able to have this discussion where we're all sitting together and looking at the same piece of paper and juggling it around and working on it. I'm very uncomfortable going forward.
Hard copies are being mailed to you guys, if that makes a difference.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you, Peggy. I appreciate that. You don't want a copy.
I could print out a copy.
Well,
But
the problem is it's 38 pages long.
I know, but I feel very. Okay, I've said my
I'm trying
piece.
to find a way to pass a bill so that we at least have, why don't we wait for the conversation about whether we should send a bill out of this committee next week when we take it up again and hear from the witnesses who've put countless hours into the bill before we kill it. We should give it a fair hearing. Although I understand.
I'm just not sure that this is a fair hearing, the way we're
Okay.
having to do it. That's
Well,
my fear.
Okay.
And
Well,
I would
say the
say
same
that-
thing about some of our bills.
I would say that we're not killing the bill at this point if we decide to wait until January. That's
Mhm.
in the scale of what the Sentencing Commission has been doing over 10 years or however long it's been.
Mhm.
A 6-month wait is not a long
I
time.
don't disagree with you. There may be a way to.
Yeah.
Are there other questions for Judge Treadwell? Did you have one, Joe?
No, actually, I was just going to comment that before Peggy went through the expense of mailing out those hard copies to us, I'm joining with Jeanette and Philip at the moment and thinking this is a bill that probably needs to be dealt with next year and not in the short term that we have left.
Okay. But I would like it as a routine, Peggy, to send copies of any House bills we take up, hard copies of the House passed version of the bill. It's much easier for me to deal with a hard copy than trying to deal with something over my iPad while I'm on my computer and trying to look up sections of it. It's difficult for me. I find it easier to write on the hard copy and take notes like I did on 958 or whatever number that was we dealt with yesterday.
Okay, just say we'll need plenty of notice for them to get it out of the mail to you
Well,
guys.
I think it's just routine. If we put a bill on the agenda that we haven't taken up before, I would prefer that the committee members be sent a hard copy unless those committee members say, I don't want one. And I've heard just Senator Nicker and I want hard copies of this bill. But if I don't know if we're going to take up another bill, but if we do, I'd like it just to be routine when we put it on the agenda. Thank you. Senator White.
If we're going to continue with this bill, I do want a hard copy.
Okay. So,
He's gonna send it to everybody.
okay. Any other questions for Judge Treadwell? And thank you very much. I wish that Senator White was able to bring better broadband audio to Brattleboro Courthouse.
Thank you, Senators. It's really appreciated the opportunity to testify after at least a couple of years.
Oh, it's good to see you again, Judge. Marshall Paul from the
to
Defender
see you.
General's office.
There we go. Thank you. So I'll be fairly brief, I think it's pretty clear what direction the committee's taken here. I would make one last sort of effort to say that I think there is some real value in passing this bill now, and that's because I differ a little bit from Judge Treadwell and Judge Grierson in terms of how I view that transitional provision. I don't see it so much as putting a stake in the ground and committing to moving forward. I see it as actually a really important part of moving forward. The work that the Sentencing Commission has to do next will be made a lot easier if what is in place is essentially a presumption that all offenses will be categorized based on their maximum penalties in the way that they are categorized in that transitional provision. And then the work of the Sentencing Commission, rather than categorizing every offense, is essentially to identify what are those offenses where there's some reason, something weird about the offense, something weird about other offenses that are related to it, that make it so that it is not appropriate for automatic classification. So in my mind, it actually makes the work of the Sentencing Commission going forward a lot easier. And in general, we're very supportive of this bill and of the work that the Sentencing Commission has done. And we think that it's going to be really valuable. I don't want to get too far in the weeds because I know sort of the direction the committee is going with this, but I think that the classification system that has already been proposed and that you can already see implemented here in this bill is really going to do a lot, because what it really does, I think the most valuable thing it does is it narrows the windows between minimum and maximum penalties. And it does so in a way that really has very little effect on how things get sentenced in the first place. Because some of the really, in-depth work that the Sentencing Commission has been able to do is to look at not what are the penalties that were affixed to these statutes by the legislature, but what are the penalties that are actually imposed by judges when they are sentencing these offenses. And it's a lot more fair and just to have the penalties actually reflect what the range of punishment that someone is likely to actually face than it is to have it be some abstract large number where people are never actually sentenced to 35 years and $1 million fine, for example, for certain drug trafficking offenses. And part of that is as Judge Treadwell and Judge Grierson have said, and Representative Alon, part of that is in its ability to provide clarity and consistency, but also part of it is to reduce the coerciveness of the existence of such high penalties. When you have someone who's charged with drug trafficking and they are facing a 35-year maximum penalty, that can actually have it can make them very much inclined not to risk contesting that at all, because the maximum penalty is so huge. And so people are sort of coerced by that maximum penalty into taking a plea for something less because they don't want to risk such a huge punishment. But the fact is that actually nobody ever gets 35 years for drug trafficking. And it would be more fair and less coercive to actually have that penalty reflect the actual statutory range that is imposed in drug trafficking cases. And that's a lot of what this work would do. So we're supportive of the bill in general. We're supportive of the bill as it's been written. And we really are supportive of passing it now in order to get that transitional provision in place so that the work of the Sentencing Commission going forward is made easier, and so that it's based on this presumption of regularity, that essentially we are classifying things based on their maximum penalty. So we would support it going forward, though I do understand this is a complex area of law. This is a complex process. And so I certainly understand the committee's reluctance to take that on, in an environment like this where we have to do everything on Zoom meetings and by email.
Okay. Questions for Marshall? Thank you. James Pepper's scheduled next, but I don't see him. Oh, there he is. How are the twins today, James?
Yeah, they're great. They're upstairs. They just got some new school buses in the mail today.
Oh,
So
nice.
they're having a great time up there.
Well, good to see you.
So because we are having this hearing, I think I'll just go through kind of the state's attorney's position on this bill. It's a lot of it has been said already, so I'll be brief. We think this bill is important for a number of reasons, and we have some concerns about the transitional provision, the automatic classification. So I'll start with the reasons why we think it's important, then I'll talk about why we don't agree with the transitional provision, the automatic classification section. So this bill, the underlying policy is to create a system that categorizes sentences by the gravity of the harm versus kind of a more ad hoc approach that can be susceptible to the emotions at the time or a desire to send a message. You know, I think about a lot of the trafficking crimes that carry a 30-year penalty or $1 million fine. Or I think about the kind of sentencing disparities between powder cocaine and crack cocaine that existed federally and the kind of disparate impact that that's had on communities of color. And I think about some of the just inconsistencies in the law that have developed over time because for whatever reason, I look at the non-consensual sexual assault carries an indeterminate maximum penalty of life. Whereas non-consensual sexual abuse of a vulnerable adult, which has the exact same elements to that crime, except there's an additional element that the victim be a vulnerable adult, carries a maximum penalty of 20 years. So that's just an inconsistency that would be not necessarily cleared up by this bill, but it would put those kind of outliers, it would make them very obvious for the legislature. So another really important policy underlying this bill is that it requires the Sentencing Commission and the legislature to adjust sentencing ranges based on the actual kind of going rate. So the Sentencing Commission is looking at how these crimes were actually sentenced in practice over the years. And, I mentioned heroin trafficking carrying a 30-year sentence. Well, it turns out that the longest sentence anyone's ever gotten, I think, is 12 years, and the average sentence is 7 years. So it would kind of bring that range back down to kind of reality. Let's see. Most importantly, this kind of leads to more truth in sentencing, less geographic diversity, more consistency. Judge Treadwell mentioned, or Representative Lalone mentioned, that there's a number of overlapping offenses where the same conduct could be charged in several different ways. And the example that we've been used over and over again is the fraudulent use of a credit card is a 1-year misdemeanor, whereas false pretenses is a 10-year felony. And the conduct is the exact same. The only difference is for the fraudulent use of a credit card, which is actually the lesser offense, the misdemeanor offense, you have to have it prove an additional element that the fraudulent instrument was a credit card. So when you say that when you classify based on the type of harm, there's no incentive for a prosecutor to choose one charge or another based on the potential penalty. So for those reasons, we think that this is an important bill. However, in the House and here, we had very major disagreements about the transitional provision, this automatic classification. The committee members and the witnesses have described our problem with it very well. We have no indication that the courts are going to be open for jury trials anytime soon, that the legislature will resume normal business anytime soon. And yet this automatic provision is going to require the legislature, not the Sentencing Commission, the legislature, to grapple with all of these crimes that fall in between these categories that are laid out by this bill. I just looked at the listed offenses, for instance: first degree aggravated domestic assault, lewd and lascivious with a child, manslaughter, aggravated assault, assault and robbery with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, DUI, death resulting, all the different types of burglary. They all fall in between these categories. And so the legislature is going to have to grapple with, do you decrease the sentence? Do you create a new category to deal with that? And the Sentencing Commission really isn't equipped to handle those policy decisions. I mean, the judges on the committee generally don't like to weigh in on what a sentence for a crime should be. The prosecutors and the defenders, we can take a position, but generally speaking, these are legislative policy decisions that need to happen, and they need to happen in a very deliberate way that where you can have the proper context and the proper conversation around each one of them. So in that respect, we're very supportive of the underlying policy of the bill. We think that the Sentencing Commission, the House Judiciary Committee, and certainly Ledge Council did a good job. We support the property crimes proposal, but as far as kind of just jumping into this and setting kind of an automatic provision in there when we don't know when business as usual is going to resume, the state's attorneys can't support that at this time.
I've got a couple of questions, and maybe other committee members do. It seems to me that the disparities geographically are mostly with misdemeanors, and I often use the misdemeanor crime of, I guess you can be charged with a number of things, and some of it's felony, but it's usually passing a bad check that,
right.
A lot of those crimes, the misdemeanor, nonviolent misdemeanors, seem to be an area where there's a lot of disparity about how they're dealt with. In Chittenden County, most of them are actually pre-charge, dismissed or sent to diversion. If they mess up, then they end up in court, but generally you don't even see them in court. I noticed an email this morning from my state's attorney concern about the defense, the judge trying, we don't have enough space evidently in the Bennington courthouse to do a 12-person jury trial. Could we mandate a 6-person jury trial for misdemeanors, nonviolent misdemeanors? Could we mandate a bench trial for nonviolent misdemeanors? Rather than, if you end up with a 12-person jury, you're going to be going to some other county, which, just the whole thing, given the COVID response and all that, it seems that those are some of the issues that we should be looking at. Do you have any response to that? And I noticed that Senator Benning, while he was enjoying himself out in the wilderness there, is that wilderness, Joe, or is that near your home?
Actually, this is my front yard, Dick.
Oh.
And yes, I was reacting to your statement about the
Jury
mandated jury trial or jury trial or 6th person.
6th person.
I always question the logic of trying to reinvent the wheel that's worked for a couple hundred years.
I realize that, but it's reinventing because we don't have enough room for 12 jurors to be 6 feet apart.
So do we call that a COVID trial?
I guess. Anyhow, any response to that concern?
With respect to the geographic diversity, our state's attorneys are trained every year. They look at what the legislature has asked of them that year. And I really try and explain that what is being asked of the state's attorneys is more consistency and more look at the individual, don't look at the crime, and try and think about what the outcome that you're looking for is, and don't take a punitive approach, take a more holistic approach. Some of the disparities is driven by different resources in the communities. I mean, a lot of folks send their DLSs to diversion post arraignment. A lot of folks send their DLSs to a pre-charge program pre-arraignment, and that's strictly because the pre-charge program has decided that they can handle that volume of cases, that they want those cases, and they have the programming to deal with it. So I think presumptive diversion has helped a lot to kind of give direction to the state's attorneys as to what types of cases they should be pursuing, what types of cases should be kind of presumptively sent to diversion to alternative justice. With respect to the jury trials, you know, I understand the frustration on the part of the state's attorneys that, you know, they don't have the space to do a jury trial, a 12-person jury trial but I mean, at the same time, you know, people have constitutional rights. They've been doing things for, you know, a 12-person jury is what's been happening in Vermont for a long time. And there are alternative dispositions that the state's attorneys could work out for these kind of nonviolent misdemeanors. But I understand their frustration. I mean, we have a huge backlog and we need to find a way to kind of clear it efficiently, quickly.
Well, maybe the solution that my state's attorneys offered isn't the right one, but we do have a backlog, and it seems as that's a more immediate problem than this bill.
There's no question that the backlog is going to impact the criminal justice system for months and months and months.
And I think that we'll have discussion of the bill next week. But I also want to say my commitment to trying to deal with geographic justice inequities is one of the most important things that we as a committee need to do. And Charity, I don't want you to comment on this. You shouldn't. But 4 or 5 years ago, when Bill Sorrell and TJ Donovan were running in a primary, and I usually stay way away from primaries as far as I can when I'm not involved in that primary. But in that one, because TJ's platform was basically geographic justice, as opposed to the other, I came out publicly supporting TJ. And so it's been, for me, a prime issue. And so that's why I'm a little reluctant to give up the bill completely. So just a little bit of history in terms of what I feel is one of the most important issues that we as a state face in terms of the justice system. Senator Baruth.
I'm just thinking about, James was talking about drug trafficking and the going rate, and saying that now 30 years is the max. And this, as I understand it, would force through the transitional provisions a going rate of somewhere between 7 and 12 years. Is that right, James?
Under the automatic classification, it would drop down to 20 years. However, the Sentencing Commission could recommend that it be dropped down to an even lesser felony based on the going rate.
Right. So what I'm thinking is, if you just take that as one example and think about the legislature as an inherently political body, just the story that we're dropping drug trafficking from 30 years to 20 or potentially lower, just that could wind up in enough momentum to have us legislate outside the classification system for that crime. And that's what I worry about, is that this will enforce a lot of uniformity before we've looked at the outliers as a body. And then we'll find when we get to the outliers that politically we don't have the will to reduce the penalties commensurate with what's required. And so then we wind up having to sort of jury rig on the back end all of these as Martin called them, alternate classification schemes for other sets of crimes. So rather than do all of that in an unintentional way, I would rather see most of that work done up front before we have to, go back and correct our own work. That's just responding to the drug trafficking piece that you put in.
Senator White.
This
You
is
want to
not a
comment
comment.
on Phillips, James?
I would just say that was my recommendation in the House, is let the Sentencing Commission finish their work. And when I said that they're not good at determining the policy because these are legislative decisions, what we've done in the past is we've highlighted where we think there might be a compelling reason to lower or to increase outside of the automatic classification structure. And then we've sent it to the legislature to decide based on our reasoning why, drug trafficking, if the going rate is 7 years, why it should be a Class C felony versus a Class B, which it would be under the automatic classification. So I absolutely agree that the Sentencing Commission should finish its work before there's an automatic provision in place.
Senator White, you had a comment or
No,
question?
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Any other questions for James? James, thank you very much. And any thoughts on the backlog and how state's attorneys and marshals still with us and how the defense bar might be able to handle those? I'd like to hold a discussion of that sooner rather than later as we start to deal particularly with the budget issues in the Senate. So not today, but certainly one thing we don't want as a result of the backlog is so many cases and many more people ending up on pretrial detention, incarcerated for long periods of time because we have a backlog and can't get to them.
I won't comment today, but it's been, we have a committee that we've set up, a return to work committee that's trying to figure out the issues around the backlog. So yeah, I'd be happy to come back and talk about it.
Marshall, would you be available next week to do that, to discuss that, or maybe Matt?
Yeah, certainly either myself or Matt.
Good. Charity, last but not least.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I don't want to spend a lot of time saying stuff that's already been said. So let me just give you the high level. Our office supports this bill. David Scher, who of course couldn't be here today, was a member of is a member of the Sentencing Commission. And for the reasons that others have mentioned, the geographic disparity problem would be reduced by this bill. It would make for a more usable criminal code. And TJ himself said he likes that it would reduce the footprint of the criminal justice system. So for all those reasons, we support the bill. I absolutely understand all of the really great comments that the committee has made. And Senator Sears, to your idea about pulling out the misdemeanor part, we wouldn't oppose that. But I also absolutely understand all the other great perspectives about letting this percolate and have more time. Hello, friend. Senator Dick's daughter and I are good friends.
Oh, really?
And I'm glad to see that you're in Vermont and not in New York City.
Well, it's free to have Zoom meetings, have interruptions. That's okay. Senator Nicker, if your daughter wants to say hello to Charity, we're fine with that.
We're in school together in elementary school, I think, and then they found themselves in New York City living near each other, both as lawyers.
Oh my gosh.
So now Charity's back in Vermont.
We actually reconnected because of the tropical storm Irene.
Oh, that's right.
Got
Well,
together
say
to do
hello.
something about it.
That's right.
Hi, welcome to Senate Judiciary. If you
Jumping
want to say hi to Charity, go ahead.
My daughter Abigail.
Abigail.
I won't interrupt everyone. I know it's like important stuff. but
She's
I
on
couldn't
Zoom.
Stop myself.
She's also on Zoom with her off.
Oh, your own meeting on Zoom.
Remarkable, Alice. She doesn't look anything like you.
No, she doesn't.
All
Sorry.
right. Charity, we interrupted you or you got interrupted, so please go ahead. But
Well, I don't have too much more to say. Going last or almost last as I am, I don't think I can add too much at this point. We're happy to come in next week for more conversations. If there's a more in-depth, detailed testimony that's required, I probably would bring in our criminal chief, Dominica Padula, to help with that. But we're available to come in next week if you take it up.
and that's a good point. What I'm planning next week is on Thursday is a committee discussion about where we go from here with Eric on this bill, and let the committee decide. You know, I'm sensing that the majority would prefer to provide some direction to the Sentencing Commission to wait on this bill until they've completed their work. That's what I'm getting a sense of. But I think we should have that full discussion, and so you're more than welcome to join us next week while we discuss that. But it's rare. It's rare to have this committee with this kind of reaction to a House bill. But I think it is what it is, and I appreciate the committee's feelings about the bill. I know there was a section of the expungement bill that we passed yesterday in the Senate that had a section that dealt with the classification bill. So that may need to be, well, it'll already be over to the House and we'll see what they do with it. But anyway, so I do plan to have that discussion next week. We scheduled at noontime to have a discussion of H.936, the sexual exploitation of children. And I believe that was Michelle.
Did you say we scheduled at noontime, Dick?
Yeah, at 12 to 12:15, we were going to vote on that bill.
When is that today?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the amendment is to take out the simulation.
I see.
That portion of the bill and move forward with the other sections. Senator White.
I think that was the discussion that we had, because you would be coming home from Albany,
Right.
because you would have to
Yeah.
wait in line for 2 hours and you would have to join us at a McDonald's.
Yeah, who knew that Albany, New York has fewer lines than Burlington, Vermont? But I never expected, I mean, we drove up, security guard said, I know why you're here, which hospital you're going to, and you took the left was St. Peter's Hospital, the right was another hospital, and we went to the left, first in line, boom, boom, cotton swab, not oral swab, not a, I don't know if that was also to get our, Bev did that, took about 5 total minutes. Very efficient over there. So why don't we take a break until 12? Because I'm not, is it Eric? Is it Peggy, excuse me.
It's Michelle, and I emailed her to
Michelle.
see if she could come on earlier, but I haven't heard back from her, so.
Okay, well, we could take a break until then unless somebody wants to has some words. I don't have any direction for you, Eric.
No, I understand. It sounds like we'll get together again next week and we can come up with some direction at that point, whatever
Well,
the committee feels they want to go.
maybe preparing some language that asks the Sentencing Commission for a report, an interim report in January. Senator White.
This is not on this topic, but can you tell me what S-119 is that we have? It's a use of force bill and it's in Senate Judiciary, and I'm getting a bunch of emails to pass that and a couple House bills on use of force. I don't even remember that bill in our committee.
Well, yes, I do remember the bill. It was introduced what's what number?
119. 119.
That was Senator Ingram's bill. And we did discuss it informally one day in 2019, not 2020. And I remember a discussion at the time with Colonel Birmingham and some others. And but I can't, it was introduced by Ingram, Pearson, and Polina. It had to do with fair and impartial policing, data collection.
I can't.
It had to do, I'm reading the bill right now.
It's on,
It's on your
I
screen.
just put it on the screen.
Well, that
Yeah, but
wasn't-
I can't,
yeah,
you
but
can't move it on the screen.
I can.
We'll read it and she'll move it for us.
Well,
I
okay.
think it's too long to do that, Peggy, if you take it
Okay.
Yeah,
down.
if you,
Because
can you
this
post
isn't,
it on our
this
website?
actually, the problem is it's not a, we didn't schedule this bill to discuss it. And
Right.
obviously, in both bodies, it's failed to meet crossover. And I'm not sure, for the same reasons we just discussed, we have done a lot between the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Government Operations Committee dealing with police agencies, use of force, race data collection. Doesn't mean we don't have to do more, but I don't want to, one of the most important things, and I don't think it's in here, is training in the use of de-escalation. I think we already passed that.
Yeah,
And I think also, I was thinking back to restraint, and frankly, I had to be taught how to restrain people properly. But I don't remember what year, Alice, you may remember, when DCF began, it was SRS actually,
Right.
began to do the restraint training so that we were all familiar with the appropriate ways to restrain someone
Restraints, yeah.
without
Too.
affecting their ability to breathe. And that was basic. I mean, this is, look, well, I've been retired since 2006. So it was certainly in the late 90s, probably before. And I'm just amazed if, that police officer, if he was, and I don't want to say, well, I know that he shouldn't have been restrained. I don't know what happened prior to putting him on the ground. But I'm amazed that they restrained him in that manner against all stuff that we were taught whenever it was we were given restraint training. Because we had to, as you did at Camp Iwanaki, we had to restrain kids from time to time. And, luckily I only did about 3 of them in my entire career. But they are traumatic and are difficult. And kids who are particularly the adrenaline hits, and a weak kid can be extremely strong and difficult to control. But we were certainly taught never to affect the breathing or the windpipe or anything like that. And so I don't know, it might not hurt for government ops and judiciary to take a look at our de-escalation, what we're doing, and on our use of force and so forth in Vermont. Definitely a timely topic, but hopefully, I just don't know where the Minneapolis police were at with that kind of restraint. That's just unheard of.
well, I think we can look at that, and we do have de-escalation.
I think
training.
I sent an email to Eric, Michelle, and Bryn if they could put together a memo with what we have done. And maybe I should have included your counterpart over in House and Senate Government Operations.
Yeah, Betsy Ann.
Betsy Ann, if they could put together a memo of some of the things we've done in the last few years dealing with use of force and all that, that might be helpful to respond to those emails. And
Yeah, we got that, Senator Susan, and we're working on that for sure.
and if you could add Betsy Ann to that, because some of it, I know some of it came out of government ops.
Sure.
So we could put together kind of a update for our people. Obviously we can't take up, I don't think we can take up the bill since it didn't pass crossover. And it was discussed briefly in our committee in 2019, and I don't remember all the conversation, but I remember talking with Colonel Birmingham about it. And then there was the California passed a law on use of force, and we also had a conversation about that.
Well, this just asked for them to develop a model policy, and actually I have real problems with model policies the way we do them. I think that we should never develop a model policy as such. It should always be that you need to have a policy about this, and these are the components that have to be in your policy, and let the individual entities develop it, because then they have to talk about it and figure out, instead of just adopting a model policy and never even reading it.
Well, the helpful thing for me would be to know if the training academy and our local police departments are giving, as well as our state police, are giving adequate training in the use of restraints.
Yeah, we will.
As I said, that that was so basic, and I wish I could remember the year that they continued to provide training, as I understand it, and update them. I'm sure what I was taught back 20 years ago or whenever it was is probably outmoded now, and they have newer systems, but I just remember that training. Alice, do you remember, have any idea about what year that was?
I don't know. I took it also. I think I took it twice, actually. One for.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah, and once for Eckert.
The academy does do use of force training, and it's fairly extensive. And one of the issues that they're having right now is use of force training requires you to be in person and in contact.
Right.
And we've told them that they have to suspend the parts of their training that require contact. They're figuring out how to do that and how to do it in a way that they can provide the use of force training without violating the all our.
I would just go back to if I know that Woodside and programs like 204 Depot still use restraints from time to time. When they do, we certainly it becomes a court case, for example, with Woodside, when the restraints aren't done properly. And those, that's my biggest concern about the Floyd case is who ever taught that person, or why was that person, Clavin, was it Clavin? Was that his name? The police officer who was on the neck of George Floyd. That's the worst restraint I've ever seen. You had him handcuffed. You have him on the ground face down. I don't understand it, and so I'm not sure that training would have made any difference to him. He seemed like determined to do it.
Well, my sister-in-law, with her 2 Black children, lives in St. Paul, and she said that some of the police there are pretty, I won't use her terms, and that the person that they've elected as their union rep is one of the worst. And so they're working on trying to figure that out. She's lived there all her life.
Well, again, it would be helpful, Eric and Michelle, and if you can get Betsy Ann involved with some kind of a memo on what we've done and what the requirements are. And because I know we've passed an awful lot of laws regarding this.
We have. Yep.
Senator Sears, if I could just answer one other question you had asked earlier, which was about the officers who were observing the killing in Minnesota as
Yep.
to whether or not
Yeah,
they could be charged under Vermont law. And I had actually researched that question a little bit. And the answer is yes, that the Vermont Supreme Court has held several times that an involuntary manslaughter charge is permitted based on a failure to act or an omission. So if you have a duty to act and you don't, you can be charged with involuntary manslaughter. So I think that could well have supported charges for the officers who were bystanders observing the killing in that case.
I think one of the things that we don't do well is explain what we've done as a state and as a legislature. And I brought that up yesterday when we were doing the expungement bill and the juvenile justice bill. And it always gets to me when you see a candidate running for office saying that candidate is for justice reform and
Really?
says things that we've already done, should be done, and they don't know what we've done because we don't do a good job of explaining what we've done. We just go on to the next issue. And hopefully we get the opportunity to step back at some point and say, this is where Vermont is, this is where the rest of the country is, and we're far ahead of them in justice reform, particularly. So anyway, that's my soapbox, and now we're almost at noontime, and Michelle is
Nice
here.
break,
and
thanks.
we got our break and had a nice discussion, and on to something we all abhor, and that's child pornography. But Michelle, I believe we have, do you have a redraft or?
Yes, I think I sent it to Peggy a little earlier, so I'm sure she's probably put it up on the web page.
Okay.
Let me know when you guys have got it.
I gotta find the web page again. I've been all over the place here. Sometimes it's easier to start over.
Is it draft 2.2?
It is, yeah.
Okay, it's on our webpage.
Okay, the week of June 1st is June 4th. Michelle Childs, draft 2.2. All right, it's page 1 of 3. I'm gonna print this out. You're gonna hear my printer whirring. You know. So
Are we down to 3 pages? I'm looking at the old.
yes,
Yes, well, it's an individual instance of amendment. I didn't do a strike all because we really weren't
Okay.
changing much.
yep.
Okay.
Let me know when you're
Alice,
ready.
is that turf?
Huh?
What? I can't hear you.
Is that your little one?
Oh, my grandson, 4,
Yeah.
age 4.
I wondered. Yeah.
All right, Grandma.
Okay, great. Oh, viral. Okay. Sorry.
Is that a vote? Yes. So the first instant is,
The first instance is just going back to the existing language in the statute for sexual conduct. So I had to I moved subdivision 2G with regard to the simulation language,
Yep.
but because it involves kind of truing up some other punctuation and stuff in there, I just had to go back to the original language. So that's all that is taking out the simulation language. On page 2, the second instance of amendment is the peer-to-peer network that we've already discussed.
Yep.
The third instance of amendment is the session law legislative proposal, and I'll just read that. That way people can't see it at home. So the Attorney General, in collaboration with the Defender General and the Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs, shall examine the issue of simulated sexual conduct by a child under 16 years of age as it relates to child sexual abuse material for the purpose of developing a clear, narrowly tailored legislative proposal that prohibits such conduct while ensuring that a substantial amount of constitutionally protected speech is not inadvertently swept into the purview of the statute.
Okay.
The Attorney General shall submit the recommendation not later than November 1st of 2020 to the Joint Legislative Committee on Justice Oversight.
Great.
Well stated.
That cover it?
Actually, it makes it easy to explain why we took simulation out.
Mhm.
Good.
I like
and
it.
then- Good.
Mhm.
And then the fourth, just is the making it on passage.
Yep. I'm really impressed with section 2. Thank you.
Oh,
Mhm.
good.
Yeah.
I was wondering how one would explain on the floor the taking out simulation and talking about Jodie Foster and Taxi Driver or whatever the hell that movie was.
You know, as I'm looking at this, I'm just wondering if on line 10, if I should say conduct by, with, or on a child, because that's
Yeah,
our
probably.
new.
Oh,
So let me just add, I'll just add that. And then what you'll vote on will be do 3.1, and I'll send a clean copy to Peggy.
Okay.
But I'll just update this.
Is there a motion to amend the bill?
So moved.
Senator Baruth has moved, we amend H.936 in all three instances of amendment provided in draft 3.1.
Yes.
Okay. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Is there a motion to report favorably H.936 as amended? Senator Baruth is once again
I'm on fire.
on fire.
Second.
And it's been seconded by Senator White, or was it Nitka?
Nitka.
either.
Nitka seconded it. And is there any discussion? If not, Peggy, could you please call the roll?
Senator White,
Yes.
Senator Baruth,
Yes.
Senator Benning,
Yes.
Senator Nitka,
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes. Outstanding work. Who would like to report this bill? Okay, I'll do it. All right. When you get 3.1 to me, and we'll send it to Bloomer and do all that stuff. Peggy, thank you.
Yep.
And I've been working on an agenda for next week, and I know you're all excited that we'll actually hear from the Franklin County Probate Bar if we can get a hold of them next week on that important bill. But since I'm reporting this one, I want you to know that if we decide to pass the probate bill, I will not report it.
That sounds like a Benning bill to me.
Yeah, I know. We have to have our expert probate member of the
Where is
committee.
Peg Flory
If
when
we-
you need her?
If we pass the bill. If we don't, then you don't have to worry about it. But
Just kill the
assuming
bill,
that-
Joe.
assuming that life estate, what is it called? Life estate deeds are an important thing to push forward, and we decide to pass the bill. I just want it known that I will not report a probate bill.
Are we done, Mr. Chair?
We are done. Looking forward to next week when we can hear from the Franklin County Probate Bar.
Thank you. See you in half an hour.
On the same
Yep.
note, with regard to judges, has there been any further discussion with regard to the confirmations that we need to do with the House?
You mean
The
the judicial
retentions, you mean?
retention?
Retention, excuse me.
Yeah, I think they're just waiting until they can figure out how to do a joint assembly.
Okay. Good enough.
But Tim really is in that bailiwick. Okay, thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
Michelle,
you-
thank
see
you.
you short.
Peggy, thank you. And
Peggy.
I'll try to get you an agenda for Thursday and Friday this afternoon.
That's good.
Next
Thank
week.
you. So Senator Sears,